Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. Of course, I'm Mel Warren, and we've got the bad boy Michael back.
That's correct.
He's still serving, his punishment. He's still serving the sentence for not showing up, But I always say, you got to be nice. He's the oldest guy on the team.
I know. I'm older than you by what, a month or two? I forgot which one.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, but it doesn't, let's not get into that. We're just, you're the oldest guy on the team. So forget.
That's right.
It happens.
I know. I lose my crutches and, I pass out sometimes, but that's because of my fine lagers.
Yeah.
So, but that's a different story.
Yeah, the doctor hasn't cut you off yet, eh?
That's right.
I sent him a note. I told him, look, he's not even showing up for the show. I don't know what's going on with him. But
I know.
Anyway. Well, so things are here. Another bright day, another good day. And so today we're getting into a nonfiction. What we'll do is we'll bring in the author and we'll start talking about this. It's called Bear Witness. And it's the pursuit of justice in a violent land. Sounds like Canada. Anyway, Ross Halperin, thanks for being here.
Fantastic to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, speaking with you, Ross.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, I see I'm allowed to talk about Canada that way. I'm Canadian, so. What brought you to this project? What got you to actually sit down and go, I'm going to write this book about this subject before we get into the subject and all that stuff? Is there something that led you onto this path?
Yeah, it was a series of left turns. So I was working for a criminologist, and in the summer of 2017, we got really interested in the problem of impunity in the United States. Now, I think this is something that would surprise a lot of people, but whereas in wealthy democracies in Europe and Asia, typically 90 or 95% of murders are solved. In the United States, that number is much lower. So it's, 65% or 58%, I think most recently. And it's actually even worse than that because most shootings are non-fatal and the solve rate for those are significantly lower, below 50%. So there's this problem of impunity in the United States, and we were studying it, looking at potential solutions, understanding, just like doing a whole anatomy of the problem. And the capstone of that whole project was this summit that the criminologist David Kennedy organized in New York City with a bunch of experts on that topic. So, like the New York City chief of detectives was there, and a bunch of academics were there. And someone who was supposed to be there but ended up video conferencing in was this guy, Kurt Ver Beek, who ended up being the subject of my book. And, he just kind of told his story in this PowerPoint presentation. I think it was a bit dull in some ways, but it really took me aback. I mean, I could feel my life almost changing in that moment because he was describing this very idiosyncratic, wild, dangerous work that he and his charity had done in Honduras. And I thought, A, they might have figured out a solution to the impunity problem in the United States. And B, this guy is just totally fascinating, like how he is, what he says he's done. And I just felt this urge, like, I want to learn more about this. I want to write about this. I wasn't a journalist at the time, but I was a huge reader, fan of books. So I thought this story I'm hearing could be a great magazine article or book. And 1 month later, I was in Honduras, which is the setting of the story for the first time.
For how long were you in Honduras?
That was a short trip. That one was just 2 weeks. But over the course of the 7 years I spent working on this, I mean, I went down there 5 or 6 times, and they were long trips. So 3 months or 2 months. And I really immersed myself in the community that I was writing about. I lived in the community I was writing about, which is a poor neighborhood in Tegucigalpa, which is the capital.
So you hear this guy, and you hear some of his story, and you're interested. You think this would be good. You kind of have a couple of points. What was it that actually made you dedicate and go for it? I mean, you just said 7 years, so you really went all in, so to speak. So was there a particular reason why you did that?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the sort of like criminological reasons I just talked about, I think what I saw in Nueva Suyapa, which is the setting of the story, is this place with extreme violence, extreme poverty, extreme impunity, extremely bad police behavior, criminals who were almost beyond the pale in terms of their cruelty and what they were doing. So I just saw it as a place to like explore a lot of different things that were of interest to me, and I think a lot of other people, hopefully, like crime and policing and justice. And then I think, there was another element which sort of came in over time, which is these guys are very religious Christians, and a lot of what they do is informed by their theology. And I just thought that was another really interesting element of the story, the way that they start with the Bible and the teachings of their religion, and then sort of think a lot about that, and then turn it into concrete, actionable steps to try to change the world around them.
Kurt have his wife and kids with him?
Yeah, I mean, so you're getting at what I think is one of the first really interesting things that happens in the book, which is this guy Kurt, who's a gringo. He grew up in suburban Chicago, and him and his wife moved to Honduras after college to help the poor, like a lot of other young idealistic people. But the first really unusual thing that they do is they make the decision to move with their kids to one of the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods in all of Honduras. And, this is the type of place that, your average Honduran, let alone other gringos, would never even set foot in. And they decide, we're going to live here because if we're going to help the poor, we should live like them too. And we really need to understand their plight and what they're going through in order to figure out the best way to help them. So they make that decision, and so does Carlos, and that's Kurt's partner in all this. And he's Honduran, but he also makes that same radical decision actually before Kurt does. And it's there that the two of them really forge this best friendship, this partnership. And it's there that they develop these sort of contrarian and idiosyncratic ideas about how to help the poor. And I don't think they would have done that if they weren't living there.
So how did you center a story on this? Like, what's the premise of the book if someone reads it?
Yeah, so the starting point of the book is they're in this neighborhood, Nueva Suyapa, for 5-10 years, doing all the normal things that people who help the poor do. So education, healthcare, water, land titling, to a really impressive degree. But they get to a point where they realize that, look, that stuff's great, but it's only going to help people so much when there's violence and impunity, when there's a gang that's hurting people, scaring people, extorting businesses, hurting girls. None of that stuff can really, really make a big difference. So they say, we're going to shift gears. We're going to focus on stopping crime and violence. And really specifically, and this is where the book starts, we're going to stop this gang called the Puchos, who's this notorious gang, notorious because they're so vicious and strategic about controlling the neighborhood, but also because they're so young. It's mostly teenage boys and very young men, yet they're in control of this neighborhood where, 35, 40, 50,000 people live. And the plot of certainly the beginning of the book is really about them challenging this gang. And the centerpiece of how they do that is this sort of ingenious, creative, dangerous, quixotic idea that the two of them cook up together.
Did you ever come across a time when you saw things kind of differently than what the characters of your book would see it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. When I started this process, I made very clear to them that though I needed them to sit for a lot of interviews and give me a ton of information, ranging from personal emails to internal documents to interview meetings with their friends and colleagues, that I was doing this as a journalist, and I was going to be in control of what I said, and I was just going to do my best to tell the truth. So yeah, there were things that are in the book and that I think they would characterize differently. And I think what makes a story interesting, it's the accomplishments are interesting, and like the amazing things that they do and the effects they have on this community are interesting. But I think what really drew me to the story is that they had to make compromises along the way. They start off as these very idealistic young men, but they become pragmatic, and they say, we want to reduce crime in the neighborhood, and that's going to probably require doing things we don't want to do, and they do that. So in the book, I highlight some of those things. For example, working with a police force that is corrupt and that is cruel and violent, locking up teenage boys and young men in prisons, working with people who are not moral. There's a lot of compromises like that throughout the book, and I'm not shy about pointing them out.
When you come to the end of the book, and now that you've finished it and it's out there, do you feel like a subtext or a meaning came out of the book, maybe organically, or maybe you imposed it in the book? Like, is there something you want people to take away from the book besides the storyline itself and the direct things that happened?
Yeah, maybe I'll point out a few things. I think, just to circle back to this criminological issue, I think the source of the impunity problem in the United States even is this issue where communities don't trust the police, so witnesses won't testify, and cases can't get solved. And that gap between witnesses and criminal justice system can feel insurmountable. But these guys did this work in a place where that gap was even wider, and crime was even higher, and impunity was even higher. And to a remarkable extent, by approaching witnesses in the right way and approaching cops in the right way, they were able to bring those two parties together. And the result was solving a lot of crimes and getting a lot of gang members and killers arrested. So I think that idea, that notion might be transportable elsewhere. And then I think the other broader message, I think something I really admire about them is, like, I think there's a lot of idealistic people out there in the world with all sorts of beautiful ideas, but there's very few people who are willing to actually, pound the pavement and let those ideas collide with reality, because when you do that, reality forces you to make compromises. And what I admire about these guys, I don't think they made every single decision exactly perfectly right over the course of their lives, but I admire they're always willing to, quote unquote, get their hands dirty and try and bear the consequences of that, which range from criticism to one of their employees getting killed. And they're willing to wade into these very difficult, challenging territories. And I think that's an admirable quality.
Right. With so much invested in this story, and you put a lot of yourself into it and going there and everything. How has this changed you, the whole process of this book?
Yeah, look, I think first of all, you learn a lot. Like, you learn a lot about how to talk to people, especially in a lot of cases. I'm talking to people whose, children had been killed or husband had been killed. So I think, just having those conversations with people affects you, changes you. And I think on the flip side, you're having these experiences when you're reporting of people who are just exhibiting the most incredible bravery and total anonymity. So people who, some of the criminals, gang members in this book are truly terrifying people, people who would walk into a wake with a machine gun and threaten anyone from testifying against him. And there are people who are still willing to step up and testify against a person like that in a country that's very poor, where there's not really any protections. So there's just an element of being inspired and seeing what people are capable of. And they weren't doing it for compensation. They weren't paid. They weren't doing it for glory. They weren't celebrated. It was anonymous. So there's an element of just wow, people can do amazing stuff. And, you get to know a new country that, we hear a lot about in the news through the lens of migration or deportations, but you really don't get a strong sense of, I think, until you go down there and really investigate. So it was just great to do that, and you know, the friendships and lessons of all that will stay with me. So
How do you go on now? Like, is what I'm saying is it's probably, so you put this together and you've done all this stuff. Are you still do you remain friends with anybody that you were in touch with during this time and during this book?
yeah, I mean, when I was down there, I lived with a family, which was great because A, it made things not lonely, and B, it was just a great way to get to know the country. And it's like a big family with lots of cousins and uncles and everything. So like, I love that whole group of people.
Carlos's family or Kurt's family?
No, it was another family, that lived in the neighborhood. But then, yeah, you know, I got to know Kurt and Carlos and a lot of their staff, you know, but and we remain in touch, and especially now in like this book promotional phase, we've been in touch quite a lot, and I hope to remain in touch with them. But it's a weird thing. I mean, maybe you guys, have experienced this, but like when you write about someone who's alive and they then read your interpretation of them, it can be a little bit awkward. But all in all, I think they're happy with the book, even though they disagree or not disagree, but would have done certain things differently. And it's definitely a relationship I'd like to maintain going forward.
Well, yeah, you can't always I don't want to say make them happy, but there's always, you have your outside in perspective that you're going to write, that they won't always see it the same way as you do. So I've had that with people before, and it's just the way it is, you know.
Yeah. 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 And
so is there an answer? Did you solve things? Is everything better now?
Everything's not better. And I think that something you hear a lot in Honduras is like, I think there's a pessimism that you feel in a lot of people, like for good, you know, understandable reasons. It's still a very poor country with a real gang problem, a real narco trafficking problem, and a real corruption problem. But Kurt and Carlos, like one of their things they hold really tight to is like they always want to be optimistic and like celebrate the wins, even in a place like that. And like they did make progress in a lot of ways. Like their community became safer. The country, once they started working at the country level, became a lot safer. They did root out, you know, specific acts of very serious high-level corruption in the education system and the healthcare system. So there are a lot of wins, but it's still a country with, you know, a lot of problems, a country that people flee from. So I think that's one of the push and pulls in the book. You know, you have this huge challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge. And even though you do this thing that feels Herculean and impossible and you pull it off, maybe it doesn't feel like, you know, you've reached some end or paradise or something. It's just another challenge. But they remain hopeful that, you know, the country can get better. And I certainly hope they're right about that.
Anytime you ever felt threatened, or you feel like you're going against the grain and something might happen to you, or?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that maybe feel slightly scary are, so first of all, I was living in Nueva Suyapa, which was the neighborhood that I write about. And like, it's a neighborhood, but within the neighborhood, there's like different sectors. Maybe there's like 15 different ones. And like, there's certain ones that are controlled by certain gangs, and like to go in there is a little bit of a risk, but maybe I have to do it to get some information or just like a lay of the land. So maybe, you know, going in there, I try to do it with the right people, but that could be a little bit frightening. And then the other thing, and this is probably the bigger issue, is like when you're writing about crime or gangs or homicides or corruption, like there's the information you could get from like the human rights people and from the newspapers and from the court records. But then there's like a whole other realm of information, which is the best information. And that's often people who were themselves either directly or tangentially involved in that kind of stuff. So it's like you reach a point where you want to meet with someone and reach out to them. But like in doing so, you're taking a little bit of a risk because you have to go somewhere and meet with them and then, in asking them the questions that you want to ask to them, you're kind of revealing what it is you're looking into. So I didn't have any like threats or like, directly terrifying moments, but there were definitely some of those meetings where I was like, maybe afterward a little bit, I regretted it and said, man, I don't think I should have taken that meeting.
Even risks with maybe possible corrupt police on that side, or just more the gangs?
I'd rather not get into specifics of like what type of people I was talking about.
We've got one of the corrupt policemen on the line right now.
Yeah, that's right.
And he wants to talk to you.
Yes.
No, but I mean, you're making a great point because I mean, the police down there are, I don't want to overgeneralize. There's obviously a lot of really good cops doing good work down there, but it can be scary to meet with a police officer. This is a country where the police force was infected with, there were police who were working for narco traffickers and doing murder for hire and running carjacking rings. So, I did speak to some policemen, and to be honest, the ones I spoke to, I didn't feel uncomfortable with at all. But I also was like, those were through introductions, so I wasn't just like walking into a police station and talking to anyone.
You're not going in there saying, I'm going to write bad things about all you guys. Who wants to talk to me?
Yeah. No, that might work in, Maine or something, but I wouldn't do that in Honduras.
Yeah.
Oh, even then. Are there similarities that you can bring home here? Like, are there things in this story that you found that were quite similar to what you live with in the United States, for instance?
Absolutely. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, like I think it would surprise people the extent to which in places like the South Side of Chicago, it's a pretty lawless place in the sense that like not many crimes are solved. I actually think the Chicago Sun-Times just came out with a study showing that since 2018, only 6% of non-fatal shootings in the South Side, in Chicago overall have been solved. And, it's the exact same problem. Witnesses don't want to cooperate with the criminal justice system. And contrary to what we see in popular culture, that's the way that murders get solved. It's very rarely the ingenious detective coming up with a deduction or the CSI tech finding a clue. It's just the banal thing of like a witness knows and either is going to talk about it or not. And, we haven't really talked about it, but what they did was come up with a way to bridge that gap and get witnesses to participate. So I do think that's potentially transferable. And there's a bunch of other things they did too. And I think just there's a possibility for sort of NGOs and charities to get involved in ways that I don't think we typically expect them to here.
There's a connection. I do the Jack the Ripper research stuff, but here it is, the poor East End London crimes were rampant. And then, just like you were talking about, the impunity rate was just amazing. So, and then kind of very similar to that South Side. Yeah.
It's a sad thing. And I think, you, in a place like Honduras, you really get to see all the consequences of impunity. There's obviously like just the criminals are getting away with it. So I think it probably just increases the amount of crime happening. But it also creates this like environment of confusion because like the way we in society come to the truth often is through trials. There's a prosecution, there's a defense, and there's a judge or jury who says this is what really happened. But when you have like impunity to such an extreme extent, like you do in Honduras, it leaves this like sense of mystery and confusion about like, how bad is this gang really? Like, how bad are these like vigilantes going around supposedly killing people? Like, what about the police? Like, people say they're going into the barrios late at night and killing people, but are they really? And so you just have violence around you with the added confusion. And I think that's another sort of sad aspect of it.
Is there any way that you could pinpoint, like the United States, for instance, and Honduras are very different countries, right, in a lot of ways. But is there a particular reason why that person doesn't want to go to the cops in Honduras or go to be a witness or that sort of get involved, so to speak, that is the same in the United States? Is it kind of the same thing, just at a different level, or is there a particular thing different than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way worse down there. I mean, it's like we all know about the policing problems in the United States and why certain communities have mistrust of police. But down there, I mean, it's a different level of problem because, I mean, at a the most fundamental level of doing, like, let's put aside corruption, like when the police arrest someone down there, it would be very common for them to beat the kids up after they already had them handcuffed, sometimes in a pretty violent way. It would be pretty common for them to just rob maybe jewelry or money or cell phones from the houses that they're going into. And then, this is a country, it's a small country and it's a poor country, but it's a country with a ton of narco trafficking. So you have billions and billions of dollars of contraband flowing through it. And inevitably what happens when that occurs is there's a lot of money offered to cops to do things for narco traffickers. And that's not speculation. There's been a lot of cases and that really went on. There were cops in the city who would steal people's cars. And then there's just like an additional element, which is a bit more mundane, but it's just like, because I don't want to overstate it. There definitely were cops who were good cops and wanted to do a good job, but they were so under-resourced. Like you go into a police unit down there and like the office might not have any chairs or any computers, or they might have a printer, but there's no ink. Or, and then the entire homicide unit from one of the most violent cities in the world might have 8 cars and they might not have money to even gas them up. So people down there are used to just you have a problem, there's a crime, you're scared, you call the police, and they're used to not getting a response. So all of those things just built up and built up and built up, to the point where people didn't trust police officers. But what this charity found was that if they approached the witnesses and they approached the families and they said, look, help us get these guys arrested, testify, tell us what you know, we'll protect you, and then went to the cops and said, hey, we got the witnesses, work with us, that kind of was enough to bridge the gap.
And do they actually get put away there? Like then when that goes, is it a pretty secure prison system?
Well, I'm giving away one of the twists in the book here, but the first challenge these guys have in the book is getting the kids arrested, and they have a lot of success doing that where nobody had before, and they get them sent to the prison. But to your point, lo and behold, they just escape. And over again, it's very frustrating. They do all this work, they take all these risks, and they escape from this prison. And so it becomes a point where they say, okay, not only do we have to close cases and, get people convicted, but we're going to have to somehow reform this prison. So they try to do that in the second part of the first bit of the book.
Wow. Pretty heavy. Wow. So listen, what are you working on now, or are you? Are you taking a break, or are you going to go into another story?
Yes. I mean, the book only came out about a month ago, so I've been really focused on just trying to get people aware of it, but I'm definitely starting to think about my next ideas. So I have a few things I'm looking at now, a few Honduras related, a few not Honduras related, but also just trying to enjoy this period and getting to talk to people like you about the book, and which has been really, really great too.
Okay, well, fantastic. So listen, now, do you have a website set up for this? Do you have social media for yourself or for the book or anything like that? How do you like people to respond or contact you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's a www.ross, as in Apple, halperin.com. And I've got an Instagram and an X on that you can check out. Yeah, and would love to hear from anyone who's interested in the book or reads it and has any comments. That's really gratifying to hear. So I'd love to hear from anyone who would like to contact me.
Well, fantastic. Now, we'll put that up on our website as well as with your book and all the other information we can so people can find it easily. And we really appreciate you being here. Now, bear witness, and that's the pursuit of justice in a violent land. Ross Halperin, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Nice speaking with you, Ross.
Likewise.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.